Okay, guys, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about reviewing the information covered in Chapter 9, Three New Uses of the Ablative Case. We have covered this information already, but I wanted to review it as we take another spin through the information in Chapter 9. So, in fourth grade, we learned noun jobs, and we learned that each case has noun jobs associated with it. The nominative is used to show either the subject noun or the predicate nominative. The genitive is used to show possession with something called the possessive noun adjective. The dative is used to show the indirect object, and this year we also learned it can be used to show the dative of reference. The accusative is the direct object, the object of the preposition. The ablative is the object of the preposition and literally about a dozen other things, several dozen other things. I sometimes refer to the ablative case as the junk drawer of Latin. If I could come over to your house right now and take a tour, I would find in your house, probably in the kitchen, a junk drawer. And that junk drawer is where everything goes that doesn't have a natural spot for it. And it felt like at times that the Romans did the same thing in Latin with the ablative case. If we don't know how to do something, we'll just slap it in the ablative and we'll call it the ablative of something. So to help us understand the ablative case, consider the game of Clue. So you know the game of Clue. At the end of the game of Clue, you're supposed to tell who did the murder. And you'll say, Mr. Body was killed in the conservatory by Professor Plum with the knife. Now, those three phrases, in the conservatory, by Professor Plum, and with the knife, are all examples of ablatives. And we'll learn about one of them in this lecture. Now, the three types of ablative case uses we're going to use and learn today are the ablative of means, the ablative of manner, and the ablative of separation. We're going to put our main focus in this chapter on the ablative of means. The book covers ablative of manner and ablative of separation a little bit later on. But first, let's look at the ablative of the means. The ablative of means is the tool or device that is used to complete the action. What did we use to help finish what we were doing? It's always a concrete noun. In other words, it's always a physical thing that you could put your hands on. It's a shovel, it's a car, it's a spear, it's a weapon. It's never a living thing. It will never be a person or an animal. It's translated into English with the phrase with, by, or by means of. And the Latin translation doesn't need a preposition. So if we go back to our game of Clue, Mr. Body was killed in the conservatory by Professor Plum with the knife. With the knife is the ablative of means. It was the tool or device by which the murder was committed. So we have some examples in the book. Artemis pugnat. We see that Artemis is in the ablative case. And so when we translate it, we translate that as they fight with weapons. Notice how the preposition with is not in the Latin. The Romans were very efficient. They wouldn't use a preposition if they didn't need to. They knew that this would have been the ablative of means because it's a concrete object, and that object was used to accomplish the action of the sentence. Now, you could also say they fight by weapons or by means of weapons, and sometimes all three won't work. So you have to sometimes use a little bit of logic to figure out which is the better translation. Let's consider another example. So, the ablative of means, caro frumentum portavit. He carried the grain by means of a cart. Now, we know that grain isn't the subject of the sentence here because the grain carried doesn't make any sense. So he carried what? He carried the grain. How did he carry the grain? By means of a cart, or by cart, or with cart. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is let's look at the placement of the ablative of means. The ablative of means will either be at the beginning of the sentence or it'll be tucked up next to the verb. So we could have written that same sentence this way and it would have been acceptable as well. So keep that in mind when you're translating. Let's give another example. And this is one that I made up for the purpose of this lecture. Enemikos telis validis apognabimus. We will attack the enemies with strong weapons. Notice that you can use an adjective to describe your ablative of means, and it has to follow our adjective rules. It has to agree in gender, number, and case, but not necessarily ending. And notice here I put the ablative of means and its modifying adjective here next to the verb, but it could have worked if I put it at the beginning. So that's the ablative of means. let's take a look at the ablative of manner. It tells how the action is completed. So if we go back to our example of clue, if we said that Mr. Body was killed in the conservatory by Professor Plum with the knife, with much jubilation. I know we don't do that in the game exactly, but that phrase right there, with much jubilation, would be considered the ablative of manner. It's telling us the manner by which Mr. Body was killed. It's always an abstract noun, which means you can't put your hands on it. It's usually an emotion or some type of noun that talks about emotion. It can have an adjective attached with it. It's usually translated with, and again, the Latin translation doesn't need a preposition. Let's look at some examples. Magna gratia oramus. We pray with great gratitude. And again, notice how the adjective is in the same gender number and case as the ablative of manner. Another example, multa gaudio clamat. He shouts with much joy. Now, in both of these examples from the book, we only have the ablative, the adjective, and the verb. I want to give you another example so you can see where it could be placed in the sentence. If I wanted to say, Nuntius maxima ira pugnavit, the messenger fought with the greatest anger. Maxima ira is here. But I could also put it at the beginning of the sentence. Maxima ira nuntius pugnavit. So that's the ablative of manner. Now let's take a look at the ablative of separation. The ablative of separation shows how one thing is separated from another. It's often used in verbs that show some version or variation of to free, to lack, or deprived. It is translated with from, or sometimes, depending on the verb that we use, no preposition is needed for the English translation. And as always, the Latin translation doesn't need a preposition. So examples. Apida copias prohibuit. He kept the troops from the town. Notice how he is separating the troops from the town, and apido is our ablative of separation. And we could have put that next to the verb, so that could have been rendered like this, same translation. So keep that in mind. Again, that word order is important. It's going to help you figure out what's going on. It's either next to the verb or at the beginning of the sentence. Another example, agri frumentis carent. The fields are lacking grain. Now what's interesting about this one is this is our verb careo, lack, or notice how grain almost seems like a direct object here. But when it's used with this particular type of verb, that's why the vocabulary listed plus ablative of separation. What we think would be a direct object is going to be used as the ablative of separation because the fields have been separated from their grain. Again, we can put that in the other direction where we can put the ablative at the beginning of the sentence, frumentis agri carent. So there's a rundown of the ablative separation. Come back and review this video if you're not sure, you need some extra help. As always, I look forward to talking with you guys soon. Wale.